Hey guys, I just got these new pens through, Pigma brush pens, brush lettering sets by Sakura. You might be familiar with those, but I thought I'd test these out on camera, do a mini review, let's call it, and yeah, just take a look at what these pens are like. Okay, so let's take a look first of all using, if I can get the camera to focus, this is the fine brush. So you might recognize this kind of nib. There's quite a lot of pens that have this style. Again, this is the fine brush, so this is the smallest one. Next up, the same design on all three of course, but next up this is the medium nib one, which seems to have leaked on me a little bit when I opened that, but there you go. Yeah, you can see there is a little bit of spare ink on this one. I might have to clean that off a little bit. So this last one is the bold one, so the biggest one, the biggest brush nib I suppose you could call it. Again, a little bit difficult to focus, but hopefully you can see. I might just clean off this sort of extra ink around the end there. One other thing to actually mention with these, I did see on some reviews that someone said it's not a proper brush, it's actually a sponge, so I'm not sure if you can see that on camera, if you can tell. And just for size comparison, this is the new Pigma pen that I've got. This is the Pentel brush pen, which is generally quite a small pen, and then just a regular biro. Obviously that's with the lids on, but just in case you wanted to see the size. And in terms of the barrel, we had a quick look already. There's not really much to it, and it's quite a thin pen. Again, sorry about the focus, but it does have these extra lumps and bumps, whatever you want to call them, on the lid, so I guess that stops them rolling. So I am going to test out all three with a little demo at the end of this video. But first of all, something I always like to test when I get like a new inking pen is whether they are waterproof or marker proof as well, and stuff like whether they smudge. So I'm just going to create some lines. It's quite a nice smooth line. It sounds a bit weird, but yeah, it's quite nice actually, is that it goes down quite easily. Plenty of ink coming out. Just in comparison with the Pentel, for example, sometimes when you go quite fast you get this sort of effect. With this one, the brush is a lot firmer, but even when going hard, you can see you don't have this sort of gritty texture. You guys might know what you're doing a lot more than me with the brush pens. I'm far from an expert. I don't use them often, but that's the kind of thing I notice a lot, so I just wanted to point that out. You can see it is obviously leaving lines where they're drying, so you may have to go over it a little bit like this for a darker line. So just holding that up to the camera, it looks quite wet at the moment. We are going to give these a little while to dry before I actually test the waterproof and markerproof and stuff like that. So I'm just putting a few random bits down so that we can test it. One thing I wanted to test, actually, I've just literally done this as you've seen. Now if I go this with my finger, does it smudge? A little bit. So that's like an instant dry test, let's call it. But I should point out as well, my hands are actually pretty sweaty because it's a really hot day, so that probably doesn't make it a fair test. So this is just like 30 seconds later from what I just did. I have dried my finger just to be on the safe side, and it doesn't seem to be smudging now. So either it dries very quickly within 30 seconds, or I may have even had a damp, sweaty finger when I did that one. Let's just saturate the page quite a lot with ink to see whether it bleeds through. And I forgot to mention as well, this is Bristol board. So this is the kind of thing that I would be using for marker pieces, alcohol markers. Let's just see if it has gone through. Not at all. So it is fairly thick card though, don't get me wrong, but it's not as thick as anything like watercolour paper. It should still be enough though for us to apply a little bit of water. And I forgot to mention, by the way, this bit here is just from when I made a Pentel brush pen, pocket brush pen, whatever it's called. When I made a video for that and I tested the same things there. So, I'll put links to that in the description box below. But what we are going to do is we're going to give this now at least 24 hours to dry. Probably doesn't need that long, but it's just to be on the safe side before I do any tests, just so that no one can say I didn't give it a chance to dry. And whilst that is drying, I just wanted to do one final thing. This was more for me than anything, so I'm not sure how clear it will be on camera. But basically, I just wanted to see how dark the black ink actually is. And what you're seeing here is just me laying down some basic swatches for my other pens so that I can compare it to them. So this is before it's had 24 hours to set, and again I do add contrast to the videos, so this is probably pretty unclear on camera. This one here had actually dried out, so ignore that. The Pigma pens, which you guys will probably know, the other Sakura pens, Micron Graphic I think they're called, that was probably the darkest one. The Unipin one was pretty dark as well, which is this one here. And also I would say the Ohuhu marker was pretty good as well for its blacks. But yeah, these Pigma brush pens seem to be one of the darker blacks from what I can tell. And one other thing, just before I forget, I do have some other tests that I've done from other videos comparing all of these different inking pens and more. So I was testing whether they're marker-proof, waterproof, how dark they are. And I've also got another one that was testing different dipping inks, if I hold that the right way up. These ones were actually really good. So again, check those out, links below. Hey again guys, so I am back. It's been just over 24 hours, probably closer to 30. And the first thing I want to do now is just test. Let's test on this bit. My finger is dry doing this just to check that it doesn't smudge. Obviously it's very unlikely, but just to show it. And another thing I wanted to test actually was I often use pencil lines below my inking ones, so it's handy to be able to erase. So let's see whether the eraser picks up, or the rubber, whatever you want to call it, whether it picks up and brings off some of the ink. Okay, so unfortunately it does. I mean, you probably wouldn't go as hard as that anyway, but if you do, just something to bear in mind. Next up we have the alcohol markers. So this is a Copic sketch. This is a colourless blender, so it is just clear ink. Let's test it on this patch here. See whether they are marker resistant or not. I'm always thinking that it's really good to be able to find, or I always want to find marker resistant inking pens. I think they're really good. And it looks like this one's actually holding up pretty well actually. I'll see what it's like when it dries a little bit, but that's more just where it's gone damp with the clear alcohol ink. So that's not actually looking like it's smudged it to me, which is really good. And then last of all, I've just got a little bit of water on a brush. Let's see whether they are waterproof or water resistant at all. There's not a huge amount of water on there, but I am rubbing it in. It is bringing that up. At first I was going to say it isn't, so maybe you could get away with it for a little bit of water, but yeah, that's definitely bringing it up now and removing some of it and smudging it a little bit, as you can see. Let's put more on there just for the sake of it whilst I've got some water handy. Yeah, definitely bringing it off, and yeah, staying on the brush as well. So just to summarise those tests, it's pretty smudge proof. I didn't have any issues with the smudging and it seemed to dry really quickly. The pencil eraser did bring some of the ink back up if you work at it. Fairly easy actually, but often the case with inking pens. The Copic marker, the clear alcohol marker, did not seem to cause any damage at all. So this pen would be a really good one to use with your markers for like your line art and stuff. And definitely not so good with water. And I wanted to touch again on the fact that I thought it was leaking a little bit earlier. I've used these a few times for the demo you're about to see now, and I did notice there was some ink that was getting on my finger. You can see this little gap in the end near the nib. Now, I think it's coming out of there. Now, it's not happening very fast, and it's not ruining my work. It's just getting on my fingers a little bit, but it's certainly not ideal, so I'm not sure if mine are just a little bit faulty or what. I wiped it clean easily, but I did notice I kept finding more on my finger, so you can see here there's definitely some ink coming out there. Again, it might just be that mine are faulty, but it'd be daft if I didn't mention it. Okay, so now on to me testing these pens out, doing a little bit of a demo, let's call it. First thing I'm going to say is I was a little bit stiff to start with. As I progressed towards the end, I did find it easier to get slightly thinner lines. As mentioned earlier, I'm by no means particularly good with brush pens. They're not something I've got a lot of experience with. I actually prefer regular inking pens, if I'm being honest. I don't have the control for brush pens yet. But I still wanted to test them out and, hopefully get better with them. But yeah, at the beginning, I was really struggling to get the thinner lines. I only sort of figured that out a little bit towards the end. And in case you haven't watched my other videos, I've been trying to fill quite a large sketchbook recently with like fundamentals and studies. And recently I've been working on like clothing, folds, drapery. So I had some reference loaded up. I actually did draw these out in pencil first just because otherwise the video would have been way too long. Which means all I'm really doing is just inking over this and, practicing my cross-hatching and really just testing out the pens. Again, the nib I did think was quite nice. I mainly used the thinner nib, the fine brush, just because that's my preference anyway. I don't find I have as much use for the thicker nibs personally, or the thicker brushes. That being said, I did still enjoy using them because they are firmer. As someone pointed out, they're not proper brushes. If you're used to using proper brushes, you might not like these, but I really like this sort of firmer tip. But yeah, I did use the thinner one more throughout. I do try and, throw in the bigger ones occasionally though.
As we saw earlier as well, the ink does go nice and smooth. I didn't have any issues with like dry areas or things like that. In case you are interested in seeing the rest of this sketchbook, by the way, I will put links below to my sketchbook tour videos. And I'll also stick links below to where I bought these and things like that, because prices ranged quite a lot online when I looked. They fluctuated a lot. I was quite impressed with them overall. As, you know, shown earlier, the biggest drawback for me is probably the fact that there's a little bit of leaking or whatever that issue actually is. But hopefully that is just mine that are a little bit faulty. And to be honest, it still didn't ruin the experience because none of it got on the page or anything. But these are just, you know, rough studies and stuff, so it's not like it's a beautiful finished piece. Some of these areas I did actually put quite thick with black ink, by the way, and this is a really cheap, thin page sketchbook, and none of it got through, so I was quite impressed with that. I think people that are really good with brush pens will probably find they can get some nice line variation with these as well. For the price, though, I actually think they're pretty worthwhile. They're quite nice to write with. I think that's most things covered now, and the reference I got, by the way, is just from searching for drapery on Pinterest. I wasn't particularly pleased with the top right one, but I thought the bottom right one, I think it's a cape from The Lord of the Rings. I was actually pretty pleased with that one. But that's it, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful if you were tempted to buy these pens. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more content. It really helps me out a lot. Thanks for watching, everyone.